This conference will now be recorded.
So we have hit quorum, so I went ahead and started the recording. We can wait another few minutes for Matt, Pike, Emily, and Chris to arrive. I've not gotten any indication that any of them will not be here. Welcome, Matt. Um, with that, I will turn it over to you, Mia.
Great. Thank you, Dominic. Um, Welcome, everybody. I'll run through a brief review of the agenda. I'd like to start by reminding, well, first I'd like to introduce Catherine for those of you who have not met her. As I mentioned in my email, Ashura is dealing with some health issues and we're not 100% sure when she's going to rejoin us. So in the meantime, Catherine, who supports the TAG and who's Ashura's colleague, will be helping to facilitate our meetings, and we'll kind of work through procedures and issues between me, Dominic, and Catherine. Catherine, did you want to just say anything or breeze through that? Okay, great. Well, she'll be helping facilitate our discussion today. And just a reminder to everybody, well, I actually, do we have chat on this one? Yeah, we do. So with the chat, please restrict that to if you're having technical issues or there's a purely procedural issue, like you can't find a file or something. Because if it's in the chat, then Catherine or I will need to read it out onto the record. So it's best not to keep other comments. Those should be either part of the main discussion, or you could follow up with me or Catherine after the meeting if there's something that you wanted to add. Thank you. So first we'll go through reviewing the minutes, then we'll have our usual updates from Dominic for the PUC, a brief check-in with our TAG liaisons, Matt and Emily. Then we're hoping to review and hopefully vote on completing our equity framework. That group met yesterday, so Dominic just sent the materials today because, so you may not have all have reviewed it, but we'll see whether we're able to proceed with the equity framework at this point. And then the credit ownership group also met yesterday, and that Dominic also sent that in the same email just before this meeting. So knowing that there are time constraints and having everything reviewed, we'll see where we can go and try to complete those items in a timely manner. Next, we'll introduce the final report outline. That's something that I drafted along with, our leadership group in order to try to give our final work product some structure. I anticipate that will stretch over the next couple meetings, but I'd love to get everyone to start thinking about roles that we'll be using in the final report. And then other matters, we'll have a brief discussion on update on public engagement. Want to talk about how our work is going and potentially extending meeting times and tee up any agenda items. And then as always, we'll close with public comment. Any brief questions about that? Okay, hearing none. I don't know if everyone got a chance to review and approve the meeting minutes from April 4th, or sorry, April 2nd. I did notice that the April 2nd meetings at the top still say March 19th. I think it's just a holdover. Otherwise, I believe they are updated. So if does anyone have any other content related issues or questions about the minutes? Okay, hearing none, I would, oh gosh, I always botch this, move to have unanimous consent to approve the minutes with the change of the date on them. Am I hearing unanimous consent from the group? Okay, I'm
I have to
hearing,
abstain. I have to abstain. I wasn't at the last meeting.
okay, thank you. Thanks, John. I believe that's otherwise unanimous consent. So assuming that works procedurally, Dominic, I move to have those minutes accepted with the change. Great, thanks. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dominic for updates from the PUC.
Yep. So three updates today. The first is on S305, which is the PUC's housekeeping bill in front of the legislature. There are changes to the CHS program that we've discussed previously, most notably the moving of the date by which the PUC is required to appoint a default delivery agent The bill that was in got wrapped up into S305, passed the Senate 2 weeks ago, and it is in front of the House House Environment and Energy Committee today. Consideration starting at 1 p.m. So we are keeping our eyes on that from the PUC as a whole, as well as how the CHS provisions will fare as well. The second piece is the PUC's work plan for the CHS work. It is in development and in front of the commission this week. We incorporated feedback that we got from the equity, technical, and the technical advisory group, as well as feedback we got through the public comment process to group topics into a smaller number of groups, so it is easier for the public to comprehend, plan, and submit comments on. So we hope to have that out publicly soon. The other thing I want to note in that is relevant to this group is we are shifting from an open-ended question with feedback to begin the process to our aim is to have straw proposals, much like the credit ownership situation or the credit ownership proposal that we put out for consideration by the public and advisory groups, and then have feedback come up on that. We'll, of course, be taking feedback throughout the entire process, but for it to be incorporated directly in the work that we're doing, the faster, the better, and having it in writing is more useful for us to incorporate that into this final rule that we'll be writing. So that's the update there, and then we will talk a little bit more about this at the end, but our public engagement facilitators' first public engagement session is tomorrow night. There are 2 more public engagement sessions already scheduled. They are up on our Clean Heat Standard website, which puc.vermont.gov. It's one of the banner links. It's under the Emissions and Public Engagement Consultants drop-down tab, and it's got the link to register as well as the time and date for those next 2. We will be having at least 6 in total, and the following 3, 2 of which will be before we release the final rule draft. And then we will have at least 1 more after that final rule draft. Are there any questions for the PUC? Alrighty, hearing none, that concludes PUC updates.
Thanks, Dominic. I'm going to turn it over to our TAG liaisons, Emily and Matt. I did want to, in addition to general updates about what the TAG is doing, I put on the agenda just following up on the TAG question about low and middle income definitions and verifications that we passed over to Emily. So if we could have updates on both, that would be great. Thanks. Whichever one of you wants to lead.
Sure. Excuse me, I can start. So starting with updates, we had a quick discussion in the TAG around a TAG member vacancy and whether or not to move forward in filling that position. So that was mostly just a discussion, and I think there was general agreement around being interested in filling that. We also walked through the department's flow chart. We discussed feedback sent to NV5 from TAG members and next steps regarding the potential study. And then this meeting was the first meeting that we had breakout groups occurring within the TAG. So there were breakout groups on the topics of pacing, credit ownership, and bioenergy. And so the TAG members were split up into specific groups to focus on those topics. And there was mostly ground setting and discussion around initial questions that should be answered. And then I can do a quick update on the low income, moderate income memo, and then I can hand it off to Matt if he has anything he wants to add. So I did let the TAG know that that memo was incoming, and just a start to the Equity Advisory Group's response and discussion around that topic. I have Efficiency Vermont's information to share with the TAG. I think this week I'll be connecting with Jeff, and yeah, we should be able to send that out before Thursday's meeting, and I can report back if the TAG has any questions and what the discussion was around that memo based on Thursday's meeting, if that works for this group. I can hand it over to Matt.
Yeah, very good summary. The only thing I would add is that there continues to be a robust discussion at the tag, in the subgroups, and then sort of around the table discussing credit ownership. And these are some complicated questions that we have to answer in a short order because we're dealing with early action credits. We're dealing with credits that may have already been incentivized through existing regulatory structure at the PUC if they're tier 3 credits under the renewable energy standard. We're dealing with unregulated heating contractors that may have accumulated credits. We're dealing with fuel dealers that may have sold renewable liquid fuels or gaseous fuels and want to know how to monetize those credits. And we don't have a clear understanding yet on how those credits flow upstream to the obligated parties, as is the intent of Act 18. But it's a fascinating discussion, to say the least. Furthermore, I would just tag on to Dominic's excellent report and say that S305 includes an amendment which changes the deadline for fuel companies, regardless of whether they're obligated. They'll have to register every year on the 31st of January. The latest draft that was published this morning changes that deadline to June 30th of every year. And finally, the registry was published by the PUC. Quick count, looks like we're about 60% in compliance. We're about 50 to 60 fuel dealers have not complied with the registry by my count. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that update. Are there any questions about that? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, if you're able to share a status of the equity framework vote from yesterday.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to lean on Ben and Jen and Pike a little bit because I was a little late to the meeting, but for the most part, I mean, it was a healthy discussion of how do we intend to use it and update that based on the conversation. Memo was distributed from Dominic, who did a fantastic job summarizing that. There was a little robust discussion about how do we really got into the policy part of it a little bit, and it just highlighted the complexity of our work. So maybe if Ben, Jen, or Pike could opine on the result of that conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think we wanted to give some guidance on how it would be used and also give some weight to it being used. So we changed some of the language specifically under what the offering of this rubric is to ask for an adoption of the equity rubric by the technical advisory group. So our idea was that we would strongly encourage and suggest the adoption of it so that it was something that could shed some equity lens on all the actions that the tag was taking, and then further than that, offering it for use to any group that is involved in creating measures so that they have a way to make sure that many different areas of equity are being reflected in their decision making.
So unless there's any further comment, I feel like this is ready to move forward, and let's send this along if the group is satisfied with it. But this is something that we want to wrap up and start getting to the meat and potatoes of our discussions and use this as a framework going forward and get this to the other groups so they can actually put it to use. And this can be approved upon along in the process, but I guess I just want to check with the group as a whole if we feel comfortable that the document submitted is ready for prime time.
Yeah. Srini here, I have a question. So as I look at the 4 bullet points, the third bullet point, I just wonder from a process perspective how that's going to work. In a couple of meetings ago, talked about this group being actively involved in doing the the equity considerations of the actual issues itself or the actual attributes of the clean heat standard. The way I read the bullet point 3 is it says for adoption by the technical advisory group to assist the technical advisory group to evaluate proposed actions through the equity lens. So I'm just asking a process question here. Is this something that the technical advisory group is already aware of, or is this something we are proposing to them for the first time, or can someone calibrate me on where we are with this?
Permanent Sri, I'm going to interject just administrative real quick. Caller 1, there's only one caller on the line, but we're getting a lot of feedback. If you could mute yourself, that'd be very helpful.
Seemed to have worked.
Okay.
So I don't know who is in position to respond to the question. I can actually respond since I'm on the tag.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Facilitate the tag, but they have not received this framework yet. So the tag
Okay.
is not yet aware of it.
Okay.
To clarify, I think we sent them the sort of top line themes, but without
If
as far as I remember.
Yeah, so
Perhaps before you came on,
there was the Equity Advisory Group did transmit the principles outlined in the Austin Community Climate Action Plan. If I remember correctly, one of the precursors to this plan. TAG members may remember a transmission from the EAG where I read out the principles and which basically EAG asked TAG to keep those principles under consideration. This further refinement of it, they have not seen.
Yesterday, where there was some discussion and disagreement about how we saw these this rubric being implemented. I was hoping that the rubric would be implemented for each time a clean heat credit was proposed and created or potentially created, and others saw this more at a high level, kind of approving processes, and then if that was approved, then letting individual instances of that process move forward. My concern with that was that for any given scenario, for example, a particular heat pump might not actually meet the standards that we've created here. And I sent after our meeting yesterday to some of you, and hopefully I think I sent it to Mia, maybe you can pass it along to other EAG members, a lawsuit filed by the Attorney General of Vermont and I think 11 other attorneys generals, claiming that advanced wood heating systems are no better than the systems that they replace. And I suggested that, if that was the case, then they don't meet the standards that we're setting up here. And Dominic advised that as long as anything was listed as one of the eligible measures, it wouldn't really be considered on any other for any other purposes. So.
Well, we've got a couple folks' hands up right now. Emily, is that your hand up again?
Yes. So
Okay,
I guess just adding on to questions about number 3, I think, and not directly responding to Pike's comment. I guess I'm just looking for more clarity in, like, for adoption by the technical advisory group to attest the tag to evaluate proposed actions. I guess I think maybe more clarity about the role of the tag in evaluating actions through an equity lens, and yeah, what the relationship is between the EAG and the tag doing that work. I can just maybe envision confusion about how much the tag is expected to use this and do that work based on this document. So I guess I'm just looking for some more clarity or wording around expectations around what 3 means.
I think just at a high level, the vision was that, hey, we're coming up with an action. Let's run this concept through the framework and modify that action to mitigate any gaps identified. We want the actions to be, to not leave folks behind, and to be, inclusive, and this kind of forces that conversation. And I think everyone has that that intention, but this is really meant to call out in a consistent way any possible gaps. Is that a fair summary, folks?
We did discuss that we still need to kind of draft instructions, and maybe in those instructions we would give examples of how it's used.
Yeah,
so just to clarify, it sounds like the expectation is on the tag to run those actions through this framework. Is that correct?
I believe it would be by any group. So this wouldn't preclude the equity group from coming back and giving an equity lens. I think we envisioned these questions as being a starting point for conversation. So not that it would be binding, but that it would allow people to take a certain action or certain position, look at it over a period of time rather than making a quick judgment on something, reflecting on all the questions, and that this would allow a variety of people to weigh in on an equity issue. And it would be almost as a way to come up with a straw proposal or consensus before the next meeting. So again, this would not, the tag wouldn't be the only people using this, but anybody who was going to weigh in on the position could use it in a way that would help them to share their opinions on the equity of any certain procedure or policy.
Emily, does just kind of cursory looking at this from your role on the tag group, does this seem like a viable tool, or is it raising some concerns, just kind of cruising it over, now through the lens of, hey, if I have to use this, how can I best apply this?
I think that's a great question that I'm not, I think asking the greater tag, that would be more helpful.
Yeah.
I don't think I have a good answer on the tag, but I think the question's great. And then,
Okay.
yeah, so I think maybe it's worth asking the greater tag how this will be useful. And I think I was just mostly trying to look for some clarity about, yeah, like what actions were from the tag were going to be used in this. And I think Jen's answer and your answer helped with that. So
Awesome.
Just to weigh in briefly, my understanding too is that there will be in the evaluation or the characterization of the measures, there will be information in there in terms of, for instance, public health impacts, goes to part of the rubric. So measure characterization will help inform or provide information to help evaluate some or answer some of these questions too, as I believe. We have a question or a hand up from Jeff Wilcox and then Ben. Oops, I'm sorry. And then one more too. So Jeff and then Ben.
You're muted, Ben, if you're talking, or Jeff, if you're talking.
Yeah,
I've
we're
got
not
two
hearing
mute
you.
buttons, I guess. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Yes.
can. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry about that. Just a comment, for a rubric, it sounds like it's going to be used often for different measures. Seems really, and no offense to the folks that worked hard on this, really high level and subjective questions. Quite a few subjective questions that is just my general comment. I don't know if
Was that the completion of your comment? We lost your voice.
You're muted again.
Yep.
Sorry, I've got two mute buttons here for some reason. I just basically, my comment was, seems like some of the questions are subjective, that could be answered differently by different people based on that. So that's it.
All right, good observation. And Ben, I'm gonna go to you next.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Yeah, that's a great point, Jeff. Yeah. So one thing. So I was on the equity working group yesterday, focusing on this, and it just struck me, after Emily's question and Srini's question earlier, I think it's probably good to include. We have in here these 4 points about. Basically how this rubric should be used. And, I think we should explicitly say in here that the equity advisory group will be utilizing this to assess equity issues, broadly in the Clean Heat Standard. Basically or you will remember that, we have to advise on the equitable distribution of clean heat measures, for example, as part of the Clean Heat Standard. So, I think, to Emily's question, this will be utilized by the TAG when they're making in their decision-making process, or that's how we envisioned it. But I think we also need to include in there that we, as an equity, advisory group, that we ourselves will be also using this to complete our work. So that should probably be included. And Jeff, to your point specifically, I mean, you do bring up a good point. These are some pretty high-level questions here that. Are you suggesting that we should parse these down further to be even more specific? Because I see what you're saying. Some of these questions are pretty broad in scope. I think we discussed that. I think that's a good thing, but to your point, it could also be to the detriment. I don't know how useful the data from some of these questions will be.
Yeah, it was a general comment. It just seems high level and subjective, but I don't know. I guess it'd be nice to know some examples of how it will be used. That would, kind of clarify whether I'm way off base or not. But I guess we probably don't know those examples yet.
Well, I can let you know. So what we discussed yesterday is, the equity, the technical advisory group utilizing this in their work. For example, they have quite a few decisions to be made on their within that group. They're going to be advising on, the value of the clean heat credits, for example. So I think it was envisioned that they would look at this rubric as they're making, their final recommendations, when setting the credit value, for example. That's just the first instance that comes to mind. That's going to have wide ranging, depending on what the value of the credits is, that's going to really set the tone for like the rest of, for the entire credit market. So we wanted to make sure there's equity as a portion of that decision-making process, of course. So that would be one of them, and then for us specifically for our tasks. But so it'd be I've kind of argued in the, put forward yesterday in the group that, this should be kind of used for broader policy discussions and policy decision in the decision process. So, yeah, I don't know if that offers any clarity, but.
Yeah, thanks. That's good.
Srini, you had your hand was up next.
So maybe I can just offer a little bit of a perspective from the climate action plan background here. the equity framework from a climate action plan perspective has been used in two different ways. Some cities didn't even think about equity action framework until the climate action plan was done, and then it was kind of thrown across the fence to a group of people, like in places like Boston, and they spent about 6 or 9 months looking at the individual strategies of greenhouse gas emission reduction, and they kicked back a lot of the strategies back to the technical group because some of them were just not viable. So that is one extreme example. There are other cities that included the equity framework early on in the climate action plan strategies, such that there are no surprises later. So having seen that, my suggestion of bringing up the equity framework and doing the rubric early on is to get familiarized with it so that the technical advisory group knows what is coming down the road. So I think we should talk about what exactly are we going to evaluate the framework with. I have heard the term high level, I've heard the term concepts, I've heard the term policies. So I think we should be more specific, and maybe what we are talking about is specific strategies of clean heat standard. Maybe we should stick to one simple language that says whether it is a concept, whether it is a strategy, whether it's an idea, or it's a very specific policy. And that's what we are going to evaluate the framework with. And I'm not really sure whether it should be done by one group specifically. This may need a lot of cross-functional resources to get the right input to the point that Jeff was making. Some of these questions may not be easy to answer by a small group of people. So I just wanted to give a higher level perspective based on how this is being used in climate action plans.
Thanks. That was helpful. Mike and then me.
Yeah, I just want to remind folks that, the energy action, excuse me, wow, the equity advisory group is a short-lived group, and I think this was always designed to live past the sunset of our little group here. So in as much as we'll be using it, it's really a tool that has to work for the technical advisory group and the PUC when they are evaluating actions, which until yesterday was entitled eligible heat measures. Was it clean measures? I forget what we used before that. So the rubric itself tells us what it's designed to evaluate, and that's the various actions that are before either the PUC or the TAG or any other organization, designated delivery agent, whoever who needs to evaluate some of the actions before them.
Thanks. Yeah, noted that throughout this document it refers to, I believe, proposed actions, and we didn't. I don't know if folks were aware of this. That was one of the major changes to the document from the version that you got earlier, which is to change the clean heat measures to the word actions, proposed actions. And there was one other small edit. Mia.
Thanks, Catherine. We are coming up on time. We still have some more. I'm not hearing that this group has consensus to sign off on it, and I think that's okay. But if we are going to try to update this at a future meeting or kick it back to the subcommittee, I think we need to give them a clear consensus about what we want them to change, because I'm not necessarily hearing that in the group, and I'm not sure we've identified a way to move forward on this. Just want to keep everyone mindful of how few months we have left to work on this, and this should be one of our foundational documents, as people have mentioned. So it's, I think, imperative that we get something and be open to updating it later if we need to, but being able to complete this task. Thanks.
I appreciate that. I think that's very helpful. And I, as you said, I'm hearing a few requests for clarification about how it will be used. So that sounds like that's one of the tasks that might go back to the subgroup, is just being very clear about how and at what level it will be used. But if there are additional comments on that, that would be super helpful so we can have a clear charge to the subgroup. Ben, did you want to get back in?
Sure. Yeah. To Mia's point, I would be fine, kind of adopting this as is. I think, I guess to be more direct about, Srini's right. We're kind of talking about policy, concepts, etc. I'll just say, straight away here that I think this is designed to be utilized to be essentially incorporated into the policy making process, during the rulemaking phase of the Clean Heat Standard. So I think that's how it should be utilized. And I think it definitely could be further refined. But to Mia's point, I think we need to, this is a foundational document of our group, so we probably should advance it as is, because I don't think there's any major omissions in it from my view. I think it's pretty good, but in the interest of getting things done, I'd say we could probably adopt it, and then if in the near future we'd like to change it slightly, I think we still have a little bit of time to do that before this is used in earnest for setting final policy.
Okay, actually, Ben, I'm going to ask you while I take Jen next to think about putting that into the form of a motion so we can test it and see if there's support for that going forward. But Jen, I want to hear if you have something to add to the conversation first.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to agree with Ben and say part of our conversation was that we wanted to get this to the TAG group as soon as possible because decisions are being made. It's moving pretty fast. And I think that as a group, we agreed that we liked what was in the Austin rubric. And this is basically that with some changes that we talked about last time. And I think it is broad because every group is going to use it differently. There's nothing binding about it. It's more, for me, a conversation starter and a way to think about certain aspects of equity that might not come to mind. So I would like to second with Ben that it'd be nice to get this going forward, realizing that there may be some ways that we can refine it in the future.
Thanks. So Ben, can I ask if you have a motion to put before the group?
Yes, yeah. So I motion that the Equity Advisory Group adopt this rubric for use and be sent to TAG for their approval.
For their approval, is that, are you looking for their approval or for their use? Just to be clear, do they need to approve it?
For their use, sorry. Sorry, I had a lot of background noise there. Yeah, and I adopt that, or I move to or I motion to for the Equity Advisory Group to adopt this as our official, equity rubric for utilization in the Clean Heat Standard policymaking process.
All right, I'm going to repeat that and see if we can have a second or any amendments. It's been moved that the Equity Advisory Group adopt this document as the official rubric, equity rubric in the Clean Heat Standard policy development. Full stop, is that right?
Sounds good to me,
Yeah.
yes.
I'm not comfortable with that language as is. I think it's, we don't need to add the policy term into this. We're providing this as a tool for the Clean Heat Standard. And yeah, I can't support any language that says this is only used at the policy level.
That was Pike?
Yes.
I'm sorry, okay. Well, you can, Dominic, I'm going to need you for your Robert's Rules referencing here, but you can we can either amend this or vote on it and decide how would we like to proceed, Dominique? What's the best option?
Correct. So we are currently in discussion on the motion made by Ben and repeated by Catherine. Obviously, Pike has spoken against. He is able to offer a motion to amend. I would recommend we continue this discussion to get a feeling of where the group as a whole is before Pike decides whether or not he tries to amend or just tries to have it not be passed.
All right, so continued discussion. So I see both Chris and Mia's hand up. Chris, you want to weigh in here?
I'll let the chair go first.
Okay.
She carries a little more weight. Thank you.
That's okay, Chris. But my amendment was simple in terms of if we are sending it to the tag as an official document, we should also consider this sent to the PUC as well, I believe, at the same time. So that would be the amendment I'd make with the consensus of the group, unless there's further discussion needed. Thanks.
So the original motion did not mention that this would be sent to the tag, but that can be added. And if it is added, you're suggesting that it be sent to the tag and the PUC simultaneously. Is that right?
Yes, if it's sent to the tag, I would motion that it would amend that it would also be sent to the PUC simultaneously. Thanks.
Okay. Now, Chris.
Yep, I second that motion. For, I think for the exact reasons that Srini mentioned, procedural equity was one of the principles that was outlined in the Just Transition document. This isn't something where we want to evaluate after it's been designed and then it's like, all right, go make this, try to go make this work. You want this incorporated in the development. It's a document that I don't think will ever be perfect. There's a lot of, I just don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good here, and let's get it going forward. And
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Srini?
So I would say maybe as a suggestion to modification of the language, something that goes like a tool to be specifically used for evaluation of actions, any actions related to clean heat standard development. So I do agree that we should take out the policy out of it, and we should make a very direct reference to the application of the tool on any actions towards the development of clean heat standard. So it refers to all actions or any actions, I don't know what the right language is, and associated with the development of clean heat standard.
Okay.
I would support that.
So we're not voting, just a minute. So thanks, Pike.
Correct. I just want to butt in for procedural cleanness on this. I think we should continue to discuss this and have these suggestions come in. When we have coalesced around a suggestion, someone will offer an amendment in the form of a substitute. We'll have 2 votes. We can keep moving. Just as some procedural recommendations.
We just have one more hand, Jeff, and then I think we got a minute.
Yeah, I think my comment would be to get an expert, plain language expert, and to like some of this tool needs to be useful for the people that are going to use it, and I think it could use some tuning, like does the proposed action reduce stress, anxiety, and depression and improve mental health? I mean, I don't think that is ever going to be a question that's going to be helpful for the user. For some, it's going to put in depression. For some, it's, and there's other things that are so broad that are just impossible to define, let alone answer. I think it needs, no offense to folks, if it's going to be useful, it needs a pretty significant tune-up. And that's, no offense, that's my comment.
Okay, thanks. All right, we're at a place, I think there's no more hands. Oh, sorry, Jen. Your hand is back.
Sorry, I just snuck in there. I just wanted to respond to Chris. We did talk the other day that someone does not have to answer all the questions. Non-applicable is fine. So again, it's more of a way to raise concerns, have people think about things, but in the end, everybody's going to use it in a way that they feels best for whatever action they're evaluating.
So in the rubric, I noticed there's a neutral. Is that your non-applicable? Or is there a place to actually, you just skip the question?
I think our idea was skip the question or non-applicable. Because again, it wouldn't be binding. It would be more of a way for people to be able to express their thoughts on these different equity issues as conversation was coming up about them.
Okay. Chris, back to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. My
That
hand
was
should
your,
be dead. I already seconded Mia's friendly amendment.
okay.
Yeah,
So
thanks.
we need, actually at this point, I believe, a formal amendment to be posed. And then we would take a vote on the original and then the amended. Is that right, Dominique?
So the motion from Ben is still the
Standing.
task in front of the group. There have been a couple suggestions that by reaction seems like they would be incorporated. So we need to figure out that language and then
21.
vote on the language. So am I correct in saying the two suggested amendments were to have this sent to TAG and PUC and for something about any actions related to development of CHS?
Thank
Sorry,
you.
Dominic, one second. I'm getting so much feedback I can't hear. Whoever's not muted, please mute yourself. Thank you.
That was Matt. The two pieces mentioned were one from Mia about having this sent to TAG and PUC, and then Srini suggested this being used for the evaluation of any action related to the development of the clean heat standard. Catherine, could you read back?
Yeah. So I have, the original is, I gotta go find it, my notes here.
Can I take back the original and just have somebody repropose a new one? Is that easy?
Yeah, that aren't, isn't he?
Mia, as the chair, could ask consent for the motion to be withdrawn.
That might be easier.
Okay, yeah. Is there consent to have the motion be withdrawn?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then I give consent to withdraw that motion. Let's proceed.
Okay. In that case, then we are open for a new motion for the group to vote on in terms of the use of the rubric or any action on the rubric. Who would like to make the revised motion or the new motion?
I am combining the language if people would like to wait for just a moment for that.
Does it make sense for us to send it off to PUC and TAG for suggestions before we ask them to adopt it?
My understanding is they are not being asked to adopt it. That is not part of the language that we were discussing anyway. They're being asked to use it. So they are not approving it or formally adopting it.
I feel strongly that this is something that the EAG should take on. Unless we're looking for feedback on something specific, I would prefer we don't extend this just in light of the time constraints that we have. So if there's going to be discussion beyond this or another subcommittee meeting, I'd like specific discussion from the group what the subcommittee needs to achieve. Otherwise, I think we should vote on it now.
Yeah, I agree with Mia. I think in light of what Srini said, and we want this to be utilized as soon as possible.
So Dominic, yeah, go ahead.
I
Want to read it?
suggested motion language in the chat. It was my attempt to synthesize the conversation just had.
Chat, okay.
And it says, move that the EAG adopt this rubric to be used to evaluate any actions related to the development of the combined heat, the CHS, not combined heat and standard, and for this rubric to be transmitted to the TAG and PUC for their use.
I
Chris,
second.
Chris is in the chat moving,
I'm seconding.
and Pike is seconding. So we are now in a position to be able to take a vote. Oh, no, open for discussion. Sorry, I have to open it up for discussion again. Is there any further discussion? I'm not seeing any hands. Oh, let me see. Let me make sure I'm not seeing any hands. Go back to the participants. Am I missing any hands?
Nope.
Okay, then we're open for a vote. And I don't know how you've done this in the past. It's certainly easier for me and probably Dominic to be able to count your hands if you use your actual virtual hand in the reaction point. So all in favor, please raise your virtual hand. We have 7, I count.
8.
8 in favor. That is the majority, as I understand this group's numbers.
Correct. And then all opposed, please raise. I will lower all hands, so everyone's hands are now down. If all those opposed, please raise your virtual hand.
Okay, we
That
have
means
one
one abstention. Alrighty, passed 8 to 1 to 1.
All right. So this will be transmitted to the PUC in the tag with the language that we just approved. Mia, back to you for our next item.
Great, thanks, Catherine. So I'll be, I participated in the the credit ownership discussion yesterday. So in a moment, I'll move away and let Catherine facilitate so I can participate as just a member of this subgroup. Beforehand, I will mention that this is another one where we're up against a time deadline. I don't know if Dominic had a specific date that the PUC needed feedback on credit ownership on their straw proposal, but it's something they're actively working on. Is there a specific date, Dominic, or is it just soon?
There is not a specific date. I believe we will move into actually drafting of this final version next week.
Okay, so we won't have, so I can envision this credit ownership group continuing to work because there were a lot of unresolved questions that we were still discussing. However, I would like this item to come out with actionable written advice from the EAG to the PUC and an understanding of what items we'd like to continue revisiting. So we can discuss at the end of this discussion how we want to transmit it, but it's my goal to have something concrete submitted to the PUC this week. Okay, thank you. I'll turn this over to Catherine.
Well, we have the proposal itself, and we also have the subgroup memo, right? So has everybody had a chance to review the memo? It was just sent out right before the meeting, or could somebody from the subgroup actually review the memo?
I can do that.
Please, thank you, Curtis.
Yep. Yeah, I put this together based on notes that were taken during the subgroup meeting. So it's fairly simple language. I won't read it verbatim here, but basically the baseline of the
we're gonna have to, caller 1 needs to be muted. If we can do that remotely, or caller 1, you mute yourself. Thank you. Nope.
The basic tenets of what we were hoping to achieve with the, so again, this is on the credit ownership topic. We discussed the key takeaways from
Dominic,
the equity.
Can you please mute caller 1? There, thank you.
Perfect. The key takeaways are, tenets of the kind of what we are suggesting to the PUC would be, simplicity, fairness, and transparency in the process broadly. But we spent most of the time discussing installed clean heat measures. We spent very little time on the actual delivered measures, which would be, delivered fuels. But one of the, the basically it could be distilled down into that we broadly think that, credits generated by all installed measures would be initially owned by the owner of the property where the measure was installed. And so we believe that that would kind of take care of, landlord tenant situations, again, for installed measures. And, generally if somebody owns the home, that they, if they're having a heat pump installed at their house, that they would own the credit initially at that point. And yeah, so, and then also one key takeaway is that we would like to have as much information as practicable be provided to the property owner, at the time in which they're having the measure installed. That would include as much information as possible about, what the value of the credits involved in that transaction are, basically what it means for their specific project in terms of, the monetary value, potentially the carbon value of that credit being transferred, and, any health disclosures, or basically just information is power, and we want people to feel empowered and to be aware of the, transaction of credits that's taking place. And we also recommended that, regardless of what is decided for the, ownership structure of delivered measures, that the information still be provided in those instances as well. Again, so that consumers have the information that they need to make an informed decision. And at the bottom here, I do have some outstanding questions remaining. There was some initial discussion about, special credit ownership rules for the Weatherization Assistance Program. Again, we did not discuss credit ownership for delivered measures, which is a fairly broad topic. Some other notes. There were some other ideas raised about the value of the credits and how they're transferred, or if they are transferred, what is the value going downstream from the initial owner. So I'll open it up for discussion. I just did want to say I participated in this ownership meeting yesterday, and I did want to revisit the topic of the Weatherization Assistance Program. Basically, I would support a special carve out for that program, so that they would be the initial owners of the credit. I think we need to remember that we are trying to make this as simple as possible. We want to leverage existing programs, and we want, our recommendations to mesh well with existing policies that are in place with the existing programs here in Vermont. So I'm just going to throw it out there and then let others respond.
All right, so we're open for discussion. Mia? No?
We discussed this briefly, and my position on the ownership was, I think even in cases where the WAP program is paying for the entire cost of installation, I think it still makes sense for ownership to originate with the property owner, just because I think it opens potentially complicated questions about other financing scenarios. I think if the PUC is going to do it, it should be extremely specific about the WAP program and not sort of introduce the who pays argument, because I think it gets really confusing. Presumably, if someone else is paying for the project in whatever fashion they're doing, I think they could sign a waiver to release the credit to that person, but the ownership should stay the same. So that's just my personal preference, not so much because of like what the WAPs are doing or not doing, but just in terms of keeping things clear and consistent across the system. And then I think one thing that I want to see reflected in our initial comments to the PUC is just the idea that the PUC sort of keeps thinking that like customers will have the ability to negotiate and get better pricing or better services based on the value of their credits when they if they give them to, a contractor or someone else. But I don't know that we can assume that, and I think it presents some serious equity issues, and urging the PUC to provide as much information as possible that would help homeowners or property owners understand the value of their credits and what they deserve in compensation is going to be important to make it as fair as possible when quite frankly, I'm not sure I see a path forward for this to be a smooth exchange of credits from the original owner to obligated parties. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
All right. Ben, you had your next hand up.
Yep, I just had one quick comment, and I on that point, Mia, I would, I guess what I am suggesting is a extremely specific weatherization assistance program only reference for the having them own the credits, because basically they would have to go in and change their whole their contracts to. It would be, in my mind, kind of pointless because they would be, have to redo a ton of paperwork. And we want to add value to that program because they are basically the primary avenue by which low-income folks in Vermont will be receiving, installed clean heat measures. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks. Pike?
Yeah, I would agree with Mia on this. I don't see that the credit ownership transfer from property owner or renter, if we're talking about fuel, to the weatherization program is anything more than another single-page addendum. I don't think it would be terribly difficult, and I think adding a special carve-out for one organization, well, A, is not necessary, and I think it's not necessary and adds complication. I think, it starts there, and every single organization that is going to be looking for clean heat credits is going to have some kind of paper trail, paperwork, some kind of contract or form that signs over these things. It's not the weatherization program. I don't see as any special case that. I'll stop there. I'm rambling now.
Okay, I thought I saw, Srini, I thought I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I think the way I think about the monetization and how the credits are originated and how the credits are retired, this is the way I think about it. So let's say each household, I'm going to keep it very, very generic, each household has got 20 metric tons of carbon emissions. There are roughly 250,000 households, let's say. So that's 5 million tons of carbon emissions. And if you assign a dollar value of those 5 million carbon emissions, there's a dollar value for that. So as long as those source credits are transferred through the respective agencies and retired eventually, it doesn't matter whether the weatherization group takes original control of that or not. They just need to identify how much they are transferring. So let's say out of the 250,000 households, 50,000 households come through the weatherization program. And let's say their efforts correspond to 5 metric tons. So 5 times 50,000, 250,000 metric tons of CO2 would get transferred through the weatherization program. So I think the monetization process is very, very simple. It originates at the point of installation and it just carries forward until it is retired and identified for the respective source of carbon emissions. This is how carbon taxes worked in the carbon trade market all over the world. It's a very specific number and it gets transferred. It retains its original identity based on carbon emissions, and it gets transferred and gets eventually retired. So I don't think we need to carve out for any specific agency. I would leave it specific to the install site.
So we sort of started down the path of discussing an item that you had listed as an outstanding question. Maybe you can clarify, Ben, this has been helpful discussion, but the intent of the memo is to leave this open at the moment for further discussion by the subgroup itself and then the fuller tag. Is that your intent?
Yeah, I think so I guess I kind of introduced this, and then since I had the mic, I just was throwing out my thoughts on the WAP program. Everything everybody just said makes sense to me. I'm not, I think that I was broadly making the suggestion that any, specific program such as the Weatherization Assistance Program, it might be easier to just write in the carve out for them so they don't have to redo all their contracts and stuff. But I see where everyone else is coming from, and I do, agree with their points of view. But the point of this was to tee up the broader topic of credit ownership. I think we, as a group, decided that for the installed measures, we had pretty much decided that this is what we wanted the whole group to discuss. I will, note that for the delivered fuels, we hadn't really come down on anything specific on that side of things. So that is still probably could be discussed in the credit ownership group, or more broadly here, might be more productive at this time. I guess we'll see what others think. But
Yeah, Jeff, wanted to hear what you had to say.
Yeah, so I guess specifically on the WAP, the agents, I guess I disagree with folks other than Ben, and I guess there's a lot of missing information that I don't know. Like, what does that mean if the ownership goes to the clients? What do they do with them? What does that look like? I know this is an opportunity to fund more weatherization of homes. And just want to remind you all, it's not the agency's money. They get the money from OEO, and the OEO gets the money from the federal government, and some from the state weatherization trust fund. And also there's a lot more people above my pay grade here at the Department for Children and Families that are going to want to weigh in on this. So I guess that's just about all I wanted to comment.
Okay. Okay, Matt, want you to have, your hand is up, so let's get you in, and then let's see what our next steps are going to be on this.
Yeah, I just want to point out stuff that you may already know, but I think it's worth saying out loud on the record, which is the technical advisory group is doing a significant deep dive into credit ownership, and we'll be advising the Public Utility Commission, those of us that are on both committees, or those of us that are connected to the government on this project, certainly know this. I think where the Equity Advisory Group can have value-added input on credit ownership is exactly with the Weatherization Assistance Project and credits that will focus on low and moderate income Vermonters. A credit could have zero, it could be owned, you install a heat pump, you install a modern wood stove, you install weatherization. It could have zero monetary value to the consumer. How it will be distributed will be the contractor, whether it's a weatherization provider or whether it's a private contractor, will acquire that credit when they perform the work. Whether they offer 10 cents or $20 or $200, that's a private negotiation in this marketplace. It will have value upstream, and to ensure that there is a way that low and moderate income Vermonters can monetize or at least get a discount off whatever service they want in order for it to flow upstream. Otherwise, it has zero value. So I think our input is critical as the Equity Advisory Group on ensuring that low and moderate income Vermonters that install clean heat measures or receive clean fuels that qualify as a clean heat measure have a way to recognize that, because the obligated parties will need to do that as well. Remember, Act 18 requires that 32% be dedicated low and moderate income. 60%, at least 60%, has to be to low income Vermonters. So obligated parties are going to want a clear pathway so that they can show that these measures were either installed or delivered to low and moderate income Vermonters. I think EAG's input on this is critical. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. That was helpful clarification. And I guess I'm going to turn it back to Mia for perhaps a suggestion on some next steps on this. You had sort of implied that we might, what we should do with this memo at the beginning when it was first introduced. And having heard the discussion, I wondered where you are now.
Yeah, thank you. I do think that the discussion about WAP ownership should be taken up later, but I don't think we have consensus on it right now, and I don't think the PUC needs consensus on that specific point right now. That could be a final rule thing. But in terms of, I'm wondering about the group's feelings about the key takeaways that Ben outlined, not the outstanding questions, but let's just take the key takeaways about information sharing to the customer and initial credit ownership to the property. And I think there were some comments that I'd like to add and can work with however this memo is drafted, just reiterating our concerns about, end users and property owners having full understanding and, how we'll be providing, more input on smoothing out that transfer process with those issues that Matt discussed. So I think it would be helpful to get the group's consensus about those sort of top 3 key takeaways and see if there's room to develop that into a recommendation to the PUC. I'd love to see this in writing. Jen?
Yeah, I wonder how far we can go in recommending ways that we can ensure that there's information and transparency to the customers. I agree that the credit residing initially with the property owner or where the measure is installed, I think is very important because that's, I think, where it should start. And then having procedures, so I don't know whether it's a list of questions that have to be shared, disclosures that have to be made, but being precise in what information someone has to come to the owner with before they try to enter into any transfer of the credits. I'm also wondering if there might be a mechanism for an advocate. Someone feels that they're not getting enough information or they're not being treated in a proper way, whether there'll be some kind of a person that can be an advocate for the homeowner, that they can ask questions about how much information they're getting, what the procedure should be, so they have an advocate in the whole procedure.
Thanks, Jen. Take that into account. And then Emily. Roscoe?
Thanks, Catherine. I think in general, these key takeaways, subgroup recommendations look good to me. I think just one thing to flag is for the suggested information shared as part of the transaction would include the monetary value of the credits that are generated from installation of the clean heat measure. I think, yeah, focusing on including the monetary value of the credit, it could just be noting that it could be complex in relation to the incentives being paid. So yeah, I think overall just raising the point that the incentive will be different, most likely from the credit value, and looking at repercussions of that. So just thought I'd
I
check.
think that's fair, Emily. We did put, to the greatest, I've got to look at the language. So we tried to come up with some language around like to the extent possible. I think it'll be hard for us as a group to know what that will look like until the PUC's final rules come out, but just some nod as like that information will be valued to the extent that it is knowable and transmittable. I think there's room for language in there.
Mike?
So I'm sorry, I have to butt in. That is absolutely true, but it will not be known. We won't know the value upstream until we know the market for the credits. So to have that as part of the disclosure seems to add a level of complication and unknowableness. So I don't think you're suggesting that, but to have some sort of boilerplate language that, I mean, the incentive literally could be zero. Be zero. Someone could just trade over their credits. You install my heat pumps. I like your service. Sure, you can have my credits. The value depends on the marketplace. If there's an abundance of credits, they could be worth pennies. If there's a shortage of credits, they could be worth hundreds of dollars. That's the marketplace that the legislature has asked the PUC to design. We're stuck with it until we change it.
I would
Hey,
dis-
Mike, is that you?
this is Pike.
Pike is
Yep.
next. Okay.
So I would disagree that we don't have a clear idea of what the value would be. It's going to, in large part, depend upon what is set for the alternative payment. And, no one is going to go out of their way to create these clean heat credits for a monetary incentive if it's easy for them to pay the alternative compliance payment. So there is a relationship between there. But my main question is, I think these recommendations are based on the specific questions that the PUC provided a couple of weeks ago. And I don't think we have fully responded to the question of, should customers first evaluate and give informed consent to a deliver-initiated use of a delivered clean heat measure, no matter what the blend percentage? I think not only is information needed, but I think consent needs to be provided. I don't think any fuel dealer should be piping in a proposed clean heat measure without the consent of the person burning that fuel. So I would like to add that to these recommendations.
Well, as I understand it, Pike, that would be something that is taken up under the open questions, the outstanding questions, which is the credit ownership for delivered measures, which hasn't been addressed yet by the subgroup. So that would have to.
Okay. Well, if I'm jumping ahead, my apologies.
Next hand is Jen and then Mia.
Yes, in my mind, I'm trying to think how these transactions go, and I think maybe not the value of the credit can be defined, but certainly the value of the work or the scope of the work. So at that level, whatever the homeowner is going to ask a contractor to do or install, that should have some value, and the homeowner should know the scope of the work that's going to be performed. I think that's the only way for them to evaluate who they want to do the work.
Jen, if I could just ask for clarification, is your point going to the specifics of the 3 items, the policy takeaways, particularly the 2-item policy takeaways and their recommendations?
I guess my point, I'm asking for some clarification too. I'm thinking of a homeowner wanting to have something put in, put a heat pump in, just for example, and they're going to contract or work with somebody that will then have the credits transferred to them. And that seems to me to go to the information sharing, the transparency, the informed consent. And that seems to me that would have some value to it, but maybe not the value of the credit down the road, but the value of the work to the homeowner. And again, this is kind of new for me too.
I don't know if somebody in that group has a response or a clarification for Jen on that point. Mia, I'm going to turn it back to you for now.
Sure. We are over time on this issue. I don't want to ever cut off healthy discussion in this group because I think people have a lot of good points, but realistically, we'll never have time in one of our agendas. We have later items to talk about extending these meetings, but we are never going to have time in these agendas for really robust, extensive discussions to be held because our agendas keep getting packed with important issues to bring up. So I would encourage anybody who has feelings about this to, continue attending subcommittee meetings, which I think we should continue and try to work out these issues. In the meantime, in the interest of continuing our agenda, I would consider making a motion to take, and Dominic, I can fix this language, but basically to take the 3 bullet points under key takeaways, sort of clarify those points with some of the issues we've mentioned, and put that in a memo to the PUC. And that would be something I would propose doing and transmitting to the group afterwards. And if the group disagreed with the sort of ways I'd phrase that, that's something we could, continue bringing up to the PUC. But I'm really eager to get substantive feedback in writing to the PUC on this issue. So I'm going to turn it over to the group if there's heavy opposition to sort of outlining along what I proposed, and if there isn't, I'll craft a motion language on that. Matt, or did you have your hand up? Sorry.
Pike did.
Pike, sorry, I'm confused. Yep.
Yeah, before we provide any recommendation, I would, again, like to see that we are recommending that consent needs to be required.
So you can make that amendment. I don't think our group fully talked through that idea. So I would, I guess, personally push that to a next one, but the group can decide on that.
Well, that was a specific question asked of us by the PUC in there.
I'm not in favor of that, Pike, and I'm happy to explain why if the chair would like to.
Are we talking specifically about delivered fuels? Because again, that was not an issue that has been discussed. It is an issue that is yet to be discussed. It is being pushed forward, but it's not being neglected, as I understand it. It will be taken up. I think what I'm hearing Mia propose is that only the recommendations that have so far been drafted around installed measures would be translated into a memo that you would then have the opportunity to review. Would that memo go back to the subgroup first, Mia, or would it be directly to the full group?
I don't think we have time to get this back to the full group in the time frame that the PUC requires. So I don't think that shuts down all credit ownership issues. To the contrary, I want to keep talking about it, but I think we need something this week to the PUC in writing. I drafted some language in the chat for Dominic that the group can discuss, and I'll make that in a motion if that's workable. So my comments were to incorporate the 3 bullet points under key takeaways in the draft recommendations with clarifying context about, things we mentioned in this discussion about to the extent information is knowable, into a memo sent by the PUC. I would prepare this memo and then circulate it with the group after the fact. I'm aware that sort of leaves some agency with me as chair, but I'll try not to be heavy-handed with that.
And you would incorporate then any comments received or take into account any comments received?
In future meetings, so in this meeting, I just wanted to clarify, like, for example, Emily's comment about information that's knowable versus not knowable. I wanted to sort of give this group a bit of an out for things that we're not sure of, but we think could potentially be important, like information on the value of credits. It's not clear what is knowable and what is not knowable. So it's more in the spirit of a recommendation to the PUC that they consider what information is knowable. And again, apologies, I'm not trying to be wishy-washy with this, just trying to move this on, but not shut down the discussion we had today. So I'm hoping that needle is threaded, but happy to take input on that from the group.
Okay, I just want to be clear in your motion that the memo you will draft, you will share with the whole group, but it will go directly to the PUC without further amendment.
Correct.
Okay. So that everybody is on the same page here. So that is the motion. Is there a second? We have a second to this motion?
I don't believe seconds are required per the change in procedure.
So are we suggesting that we don't weigh in at all on delivered fuels? Is that what's happening?
I'll let me clarify.
So not at this time, in the interest of getting something time sensitive to the PUC now. I absolutely want to discuss that, and that could be the entire topic for the next subgroup meeting if people want. But I'm trying to get the group to consensus on what can be transmitted to the PUC this week.
And why is this time sensitive but not the other piece?
I think both are time sensitive. The PUC is making recommendations this week or early next week, so this is an important inflection point for us to submit feedback. I think the 3 bullet points are things that this group may come to consensus on and be willing to vote on. I'm not hearing that for delivered fuels at this point.
And is the
Happy to
PUC
consider
only
them.
making decisions on installed measures?
Dominic?
The drafts of our orders are they are living documents that we continue to work on. I would agree with any concrete recommendations we can get are useful, and as early as possible. We will obviously have to address both situations.
Srini, in the interest of discussion on the motion,
Yeah.
would you like?
So what I would like to offer as a suggestion is maybe we take this approach as a phase 1, phase 2. Phase 1 input we are ready to give on the install measures, qualify that in the memo. And then phase 2, we still need the subgroup to engage and deliberate on a position that we want to take on delivered fuel, so that PUC will be aware of what we are doing. So it's not like we are just short circuiting the process, but let's just make them aware that we are delivering on one piece of it now, and we'll be delivering on the other piece a couple of weeks from now, so that they know what to wait for.
Good suggestion. Mia, it was your motion. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I can clarify that. Like, Srini, you're saying that incorporated into the motion would be letting the PUC know that we plan to continue to take up these issues. I don't think they'll wait for us, quite frankly. So are we, I guess my clarification, Srini, is, are we asking them to wait or telling them that we will have further feedback and letting them decide how they want to respond to that?
I mean, my read is we are not ready to state a position on delivered fuels today. In the interest of time, we have less than half hour for this meeting, and we haven't had a subgroup focused on that. So why not take a constructive path of saying we have taken a position on delivered fuel? I mean, not delivered, installed heat measures, and here is what it is. And then 2 weeks from now, we will inform you on our position on delivered fuels. So set an expectation with them. It's up to them to decide what they want to do. Let them decide. While we have the opportunity, let's set an expectation.
Okay. Pike, one more comment, and then I think we probably need to make a decision on the motion.
We just created a rubric with which to make decisions, and we have a specific question in front of us about delivered fuels. I don't see, and I think the question is pretty clear based on the rubric we've already created. I don't see why it would take more than 5 minutes to make a decision on the question, is consent required?
So I guess it's the there's a decision that needs to be made about how much more time we want to spend on this and what we would push off the agenda if necessarily. We would have to make a motion around what you have proposed, Pike, then have some further discussion about it. I think it probably will take more than 5 minutes since we haven't had a full discussion, but and we have had somebody. So Mia, in terms of the agenda, how would you like to proceed?
So I think this is an important discussion. I am willing to introduce the final report outline at a future meeting. I will say this group is not producing enough work for us to proceed on schedule. So I think this discussion should transmit into further discussion about what the subgroups need to do to produce actionable results, work outside of these meetings that members need to do to review and come with actionable suggestions. this is a huge task that we all have to do, but if we can't sort of move forward on action items, we're not going to be prepared to inform the PUC at key inflection points or at the end of the year. So that's all to say, like, we can push items off this time. We can't do that every time we have a sort of large item to deal with. So in terms of a motion, I guess I'm trying to think of the best way to do that. Let's see. Does anyone have a motion to push the final report outline to a future meeting and continue with the discussion about credit ownership issues? Does anyone want to make that motion?
Yeah, you can ask unanimous consent to do that.
So moved.
Okay, so I'd like to hear what the group says about whether they want to do this, since we already really, so Jeff moved to make that motion. Does anyone second that motion?
Seconds are not required.
Okay, so let's move to remove the final report outline and continue this discussion about credit ownership update. That means that we are going to proceed at 2:10 to other matters, and we are going to stay on schedule for that. So let's continue this discussion for now. Thanks.
So to continue this discussion, I think it would be helpful if, Pike, you made a formal motion about what you would like to be incorporated into the recommendations to the PUC. Can you restate in formal motion terms?
No, I don't know Robert's Rules of Order well enough.
I don't know that you don't need to know Robert's rules. Just say what you would like to be included as part of the overall memo to the PUC. We've already had a motion to include.
I'm looking to have this group agree that consent is required from consumers before any proposed clean heat measure is foisted upon them.
So you're talking generally about all delivered and installed.
Yes, consent is needed everywhere.
Okay. I'm writing it down by hand. Does this have to be in the form of an amendment? Can we make this a form of amendment to the motion? That it be added to the 3 takeaways already proposed?
Yes, that would work. It would, yes. Pike's motion to EAG adopt the position that consent is required for delivery of biofuels. Pike, please correct me if I misstated that. Is added to the direction of Mia's polishing of the memo.
I believe he stated that it would be consent is required from consumers before any installed or delivered clean heat standards or clean heat measures are installed. So correct me if I'm wrong, Pike, but and that would be added to the 3 other key takeaways.
That sounds good to me, yes.
Okay. All right. Open for discussion. Jen, and then Ben, and then Srini.
I would need a little bit, I'm not as aware of what the term informed consent means in this situation. I would imagine that anytime someone is asking someone to come in and install something in their home, that they would, of course, have to agree to that contractually. So I'm not sure. So maybe, Pike, you could explain that term more. It sounded like maybe you were using it initially for delivered fuels. For instance, if somebody was using a different type of gas or a different type of fuel that was more
Can you provide a scenario?
I don't understand the concept or what somebody would be signing, except that I would think anything somebody does to someone's house would have to come with informed consent.
Exactly.
So are you envisioning that things will not come without informed consent?
So I don't know. I don't know if that's important. If you agree that consent is needed, let's put it on paper. But the PUC is envisioning that some fuel measures could be delivered without consent, and I'm saying no.
So someone's fuel, the composition of their fuel could change without consent, and someone would get a credit based on that. I think people were talking about this last meeting, right? So a fuel company could decide they're going to use a different type of fuel, get a credit without the consent. But it seems that if the credit resides with the owner in all instances, they would have to get the consent from the owner to have that different type of fuel come into their house.
In delivered case, Jen, this is Matt, it would not reside with the owner of the house. It would reside, well, in the way that this thing is going to work, is if it resides with the obligated entity that's providing the fuel, in which case might be a giant wholesaler or it could be a little retailer. It really depends, because fuel isn't distributed such as natural gas. It passes many hands, and the obligation and the credit are closer to or further upstream.
So you envision in those cases it wouldn't be an actual transference of the owner to the fuel company, but the credit would just come along because the fuel consistency or makeup would change?
Right. The credit is way upstream, as is the capital investment. And a little fuel company might buy from a big fuel company, might buy a product that's blended with renewable liquid fuel or gaseous fuel.
Okay, so Jen, is that?
Thank you for that, Matt.
Clear enough? Because we have a couple of other hands, and then I think we need to wrap this up and decide whether we're going to vote. Srini and then Ben.
So I definitely think that in the case of delivered fuels, this whole consent thing could be very, very murky. And I can see situations where I just don't know how the fuel network can maintain complete transparency specific to a customer when they are handling so much volume through such a big network. I just don't know how they can ensure that they will deliver something or they will not deliver something. So I think it's very murky. But in the case of installed measures, I think it is based on the homeowner actually signing a contract and executing a contract. So in the spirit of that discussion, if you want to say all clean heat actions will be implemented with the consent of the end consumer, I mean, I'm okay with it. But I think in the case of delivered fuels, in practical, I think it's very, very murky. I think I don't know how they can live up to that expectation.
Okay.
Yeah,
Ben. And without responding, I just want to get Ben's comment in here.
I was just going to pretty much say exactly what Srini said. I agree. The fuels, while I agree that consent is, generally, obviously, it's implied in installed measures almost, but with the delivered fuels, it's you have various blends. And then in the case of natural gas, it's also murky. So I was just going to echo Srini that with fuels, it's a whole different ballgame. So.
Okay. So I believe at this point, do I see any more hands? Srini, your hand is still up. I guess that's the same. No more hands. So I would suggest that we vote on the whether or not to amend the original motion first. And that would be Pike's amendment to include, as part of the 3 takeaways, another takeaway, which is that consent should be required from consumers before any installed or delivered clean heat measures are installed. Let's take a vote on the amendment. All in favor, please raise your hand. I gotta get my participants list back up here. We have 1 in favor, all opposed. Pike, I would assume you would be in favor of your own motion, but all opposed, please raise your hand. All right, hands are going up and down. Are all opposed, please raise your hand and hold it up. I've got 4 opposed and the rest would be abstentions. 5 opposed. Okay, so where does that put us? Dominic?
So the vote fails 1 to 5 to 4, which resolves the motion on the amendment. We are now back to the original motion, which I will reread out as Mia has motioned to incorporate the 3 bullet points under key takeaways, the 3 bullet points highlighted on your screen, and indicate. So Mia's writing a memo to the PUC, taking the 3 bullet points highlighted on your screen, and indicating that the EAG plans to take up the questions related to delivered fuel shortly, and transmit that memo directly to the PUC. A copy of that memo would be provided to the EAG after the fact.
Could I just add the clarification that Mia is drafting this memo, taking into account input she's heard about these 3 bullet points today?
Yes.
Right, okay. All right, that is the motion. We don't need a second, so all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, I have 6 in favor. All opposed, take all hands down. All opposed, please raise your hand. I have none opposed, so the rest would be abstentions. Does that give us a majority?
6 to 0 to 4, yes.
Okay. All right, the motion has been passed. Mia, you're on for drafting a memo.
Okay, thanks. I will draft it, get to the PUC this weekend, make sure everyone will have a copy of it. Like I said, I really think it will represent things that this group can agree on, not things that we still have unclear. And, I think we can arrange to try to convene a second meeting of the credit ownership subcommittee to address other issues, including delivered fuel ownership questions. Great, thanks. Okay, so we're over time on other matters as well, but I think we can get through these quickly. Let's see, we had Curtis here for discussion on public engagement, but I think he has since left. I believe there's a meeting later this week that will be the first public engagement meeting. There'll be subsequent ones in May and June. I've heard a lot of interest in people attending these. I believe the first one is full, but there is space in the second 2. I've had a few questions from people from different agencies asking about the availability and making sure that everyone has a chance to provide input. I think that's something this group should continue thinking about, but I don't have anything actionable right now. But if there's any issues or concerns related to public engagement, please flag those right now. Pike?
Yeah, I passed along the links to folks, and someone got back to me, surprised that they needed to provide a organization affiliation in order to register. And she was not affiliated with any organization. And I think if we are really trying to reach the public, many of who are not affiliated with any organization, we shouldn't require any kind of affiliation. Well, I understand that we want to know if there are corporate or business or organizational affiliations for people who are attending these things, but as far as I understand, it's not designed to reach out to the very same organizations that we're hearing from again and again. It's designed to meet the people who are not affiliated with organizations. So Curtis, I did email Curtis. I did not hear back from him, but put it out there that there should not be a requirement for some kind of affiliation on the registration form.
All people
Thanks.
are
Pike,
invited
oh,
to
sorry.
use NA or write down individual.
I can check with Curtis as well. I've been in touch with him and I can see if that was a mistake or there could be some guidance that perhaps you don't have to put that down in order to complete the form, but I'll check. Thanks.
Ben?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that I had gotten some concern about the size of the groups being limited to a fairly small number, and also I know there's already 3 scheduled, but there was some question as to what the remaining schedule looks like. Obviously, this it's already almost May. So just curious about additional dates. I've heard some concern about that. And just also how we discussed a little bit last meeting about how these are being advertised. I just wanted to throw out the suggestion that maybe, broadcasting it more widely, like on WCAX, for example, or, a more mainstream advertising could be beneficial. So just wanted to, these are some comments I've heard.
Mike, your hand's up again.
Yes, it is. I had a question if we are able to get a list of the folks who attend after the fact.
I don't know,
I
Dominic,
don't know if the
okay. So another question for Curtis. Will there be a public list of attendees?
And if that's inappropriate, maybe just a list of people's affiliations.
Okay, that sounds like a action item that we need to take back to Curtis as well.
I can work with Dominic to figure out if this should go through the PUC or directly to Curtis, and we'll figure out how to aggregate those questions in an appropriate way. Thanks. Is there anything else about public engagement? Any questions? Okay. I don't think we have time for a robust discussion, but in terms of potentially extending meeting times, just in terms of allowing these sort of good discussions to continue without having to cut them for time, I guess, is there anyone, I'm trying to think of a way, could we have a show of hands, I'm not taking a motion if that's okay, of people who would be open to considering an extra half hour at the end of this meeting? We could talk about formally making sure that the schedule works, but I just want to see the temperature of the group. So just raise your hand if you're generally open to extending this by a half an hour, and we'll confirm with the group before we do that.
And you're referring to future meetings, not this particular meeting.
Correct. Yes. Thank you, Catherine. Future meetings. Okay. So I'm seeing general enthusiasm for that. Let me get back with Dominic and Catherine and just make sure that we can do this procedurally. I'm not sure about next meeting, but we'll find a way to accommodate that appropriately and make sure that that generally works for people. So we'll follow up on that. Thanks. Okay. And then we have agenda topics for next meeting is next on our agenda. The final report outline is definitely going to be given, a prominent place because I really want us to start working about that. We can also have you submit agenda topics to me and Catherine to incorporate that. Is there anything people wanted to raise right now briefly? Pike?
Yeah, we pushed, since the very first meeting, we've pushed aside information about what current programs are out there. And I think it's time for us to hear those.
I think the PUC was still working on their summary.
Well, I don't think we can wait for the PUC. We have to. hear
Okay,
what's
well, I don't
going
want
on.
to duplicate work they're doing given our bandwidth, but we can certainly look into that.
Well,
I know
Dominic, can
Dominic's.
you push the PUC along so we can get that?
Apologies,
Dominic's.
I stepped away for a moment. Push the PUC to get what?
We are, since the very first meeting, we've been wanting to discuss what current programs are out there and how they are engaging with the population we're trying to serve here. And we're now talking about writing a final report, and we still don't even have information about what's out there. And Mia said that the PUC was accumulating that and was going to write a report or some such. Anyway, I'm asking for that.
Yes, it has been created. It was shared with Emily Roscoe. It ended up getting bumped off of the full meeting materials because we ended up not discussing it today. I can send it to you personally if you'd like. I can make sure it's posted as part of the next materials. All of that information is currently public in ePUC. All the PUC did was put it into one document.
Great.
Great.
So
We'll
that
get
can
it
be
at least in the agenda packet. Yep.
any other agenda items for next meeting? Mia, do you have specific instructions for reviewing and providing comments on the outline that you provided?
No, although it would be great for the group to take a look at it. That's just meant to be a starting place for discussions. I think it would help our discussion next time. Thank you, Catherine, to review and send any suggestions to her and me to incorporate into our agenda, but also just become prepared to talk about it for next time. So that would be great. Thanks.
I think, and one of the questions you should keep in mind, perhaps, is since you'll be asked to write this report, if there is a piece or a section of the report that you're particularly interested in being involved in, that would be a question we might pose to you at the next meeting. So have that in mind as you're looking through this overall agenda or outline. Okay, I want to stop and make sure we have time for public comment then. So I will open the floor for public comment. Anyone in the public, could you raise your hand if you intend to have a comment so I can sort of figure out how much time we've got for each individual? Am I going to be able to see raised hands of the public, or can they raise their hands? May not be possible.
Public can raise their hands. I will note, yep, we've got caller one coming off.
Okay.
Raise their hand.
There's
yes,
one.
I'm John McCormick. I'm John McCormick, and I apologize. I didn't know that I was unmuted earlier, so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I want to really go back to this question about the true equity of raising the fuel costs of someone who's on LIHEAP. We know that the Cadmus report is the pathway to complying with the Global Warming Solutions Act, and its extensive analysis on buildings says this: to meet the 2030 GWSA requirement, the mitigation scenario requires roughly a doubling of the number of heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, and home weatherization retrofits, as well as near doubling of biofuels relative to 2025. We're talking about increasing to 2030 90,000 weatherizations. Now, we know that's not possible, but the cost of a credit is going to be more than 2 cents, obviously, because Secretary Moore identified the likely cost of complying with GWSA could be about $2 billion. So what truly are we talking about here? Are we talking about the 30% of homes that cannot be transitioned? And I think that was mentioned in this previous meeting. And maybe it was Chris that mentioned it, but nonetheless, we're talking about facts here. People who are on LIHEAP are not able to pay their fuel bill. 26,162 LIHEAP recipients. Have you talked with anyone at LIHEAP? Have you brought LIHEAP into the discussion to determine what impact increasing fuel bills on LIHEAP recipients might actually do to LIHEAP itself? I asked that question.
So I don't have the history of this group, but if someone could.
This group, ma'am, do you understand anything about LIHEAP?
Yeah, just a minute.
This group.
Mr. McCormick, I was just seeing if I could get a response to your question. I'm just not the one to do that. So I was going to ask other members of the group if they have been in touch with LIHEAP on this issue of affordability.
To my understanding, this group as a whole has not been in contact with anyone from the federal LIHEAP office, and to my knowledge, no one from the PUC has either, especially given it is a federal program.
No, wait a minute. It's the OEO. It's the OEO that.
It's sorry. This is Jeff.
It may be a federal program, yes, but the
families.
So Jeff is going to answer your question.
I'm sorry, I can clarify this real quick. So I'm part of OEO. We're under the Department for Children and Families, and the LIHEAP office, I believe that John's referring to, is Richard Giddings, is the chief LIHEAP person at the state office. They're the one that handle the state LIHEAP or fuel assistance, and I think I don't know. I believe, John, you're saying that no one has anybody talked to the state of Vermont LIHEAP office. Is that what you're asking?
Factored LIHEAP into the discussion as if it's a primary part.
I'm here because I was invited. I don't know why they're not invited. My personal opinion is that could be a good thing.
But you can invite them. You can just ask Mr. Gidding to come in and describe any concerns he has about increasing fuel to a LIHEAP recipient at the tune of $70 per 100 gallons. We're talking about a federal program whose funding is dependent upon appropriations, House and Senate. We don't know what the Congress is going to look like next year. They could zero out for all we know. But I'm just saying, you've got to talk about LIHEAP with the LIHEAP people, Richard Giddings. You can't go much further until you resolve some of these things. There's more time been spent on who owns the credit than how is it going to hurt 26,000 LIHEAP recipients.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. I do think this is an issue that comes squarely under the question of affordability, which is part of the charge of the equity advisory group. So I think we can take your suggestion into account, and it should be something that, whether that means inviting LIHEAP to the group or consulting with them in some other fashion, I think we hear you strongly that that's an important piece of this.
And again, it's not only LIHEAP I'm concerned. I'm concerned about the 30% of homes that cannot transition. I think Chris mentioned that in the previous meeting. I am one of those homes. I live in a 2-story log home. I don't have drywall. I can't use a heat pump. I burn a lot of wood, and I'm going to burn more wood if the clean heat standard goes into effect. You're hurting people you don't even know exist, LIHEAP recipients. You've got to stop and think about the totality of this. This is a puzzle you're putting together, and if it doesn't fit, it ain't going to work.
Thanks. Jen, did you have a response or a comment to add?
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, and I do agree that one of the reasons we put together the rubric we were talking about earlier is to make sure that the consideration of all these things come in, that there are equity decisions or considerations that should come in. And I appreciate you bringing up the LIHEAP. I do work with the Community Action Agency, and I know there's a lot of nuances there, so that's a good idea. And I think the more people we hear from, the more agencies we hear from, how this will all affect all of Vermonters is very important.
Maybe maybe the people who burn propane and there's no other substitute for propane, maybe they should be contacting you by email and just say, what are you going to do about me? I can't transition and I'm going to have to pay for somebody else's transition.
Thanks
Okay,
very much.
I think all, thanks. Sorry, Catherine.
Well, I see, well, Ben's hand is down now, but nope, Ben's hand is up. One more comment, Ben, and then we're at time.
Yeah, I just wanted to say we appreciate your comments, John. And I would just contend that, you know, we haven't talked to anyone from LIHEAP on this in this group, but I would just, you know, remind you this is a very large policy that we're all working very hard to ensure that we think through it very thoroughly. And a lot of the questions you're asking are very important, and I think they will be addressed in this process. It's just you know, this is a large container ship and not a small sailboat. You know, we are moving this forward as best we can, and I think some of the questions you're asking won't be really addressed till later this year. So very glad you're here and giving public comment, because I believe there needs to be more of that throughout the process. But yeah, we hear you. So just want to say that.
And thanks for
I'd
sticking with us.
still like to see a subgroup because Jeff Wilcox suggested that a subgroup be formed.
Thanks for your comments and thanks for hanging on till the end of the meeting to make them. I appreciate that, Mr. McCormick. So,
well, thank you for your time.
Mia, will you close us out?
Great, thank you. We're over time, so if there's any follow-ups that we've discussed, we'll have to do that over email after this meeting. In the meantime, if there's anything you'd like to see covered, please send that to Catherine and me, and we'll try to figure out how to incorporate that into a future agenda or offline. Thanks, everybody. I'm calling this meeting to a close. I appreciate your time, and we'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.